I'm Devyn Smith, the chairman of ARM and CEO of Arbor Biotechnologies. I wanted to take a moment and kick off the meeting on the med and welcome everyone here to lovely sunny Barcelona. And so a couple of pieces. I think the Tim and the ARM team have done a fantastic job of the agenda. And for those of you participating here, obviously there's lots of partnering going on, there's lots of other things, but also just the core agenda is fantastic. They've done a really nice job of laying out a series of very relevant and timely agenda items. You can see those on the slides. I think some very interesting ones that are very European centric, if you will, and critical to that, as well as some that are relevant to the entire world. So encourage you to attend as many of those as you can. I think there's going to be some really great learnings from that. And this is I don't know, is this like the 5th meeting on the med, somewhere around there? I don't know, I've been to all except for when we couldn't travel and it was virtual, but I've always enjoyed it. I think it's one of the highlights, and it's always fantastic to come see so many familiar faces. So welcome again, and with that, I do want to introduce Tim Hunt, who's the CEO of ARM, who had joined in, I think, September last year, and is doing a fantastic job. And if you haven't met him, please grab him and say hi. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim, and thank you, everyone, for coming.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Devyn. I'm Tim Hunt. As Devyn said, I joined as CEO of the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine back in September, so it's been a terrific several months. And this is, unlike Devyn, this is my first meeting on the Mediterranean, so I'm delighted to be here. The weather gods have cooperated with us thus far, so we'll hope that continues. I want to get one important thing kind of out of the way right at the start, which is I really want to acknowledge our outstanding events team. They spend months planning for this. In fact, as soon as they're done here, they'll start thinking about our meeting on the Mesa, which will take place in October out in California, right? They begin right after the Mesa meeting, they start right in on this. And they are diligent about thinking about the panels, and they really engage the entire ARM team in a way I think it's super helpful. So my thanks to the team, Kelly McWinney, Savannah Bryant, Jancy Curl, Brittany Miller, and their fearless leader, Laura Stringham. So let's give them a round of applause. Thank you. So I'm gonna spend a little bit of time going through a few things, but just maybe a little bit of housekeeping to get things started, right? I think most people are familiar with the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine. We're comprised of around 475 different members, and they range from biotechnology companies to prominent academic medical centers to tool and service providers that are in many ways the backbone of our industry and what we're able to do for patients and patient organizations, right? It's a really critical ecosystem that we think of as an important community. And where do we spend our time? Really, we focus on convening that community, convening the sector, providing data and analysis, engaging key stakeholders, enabling the development of advanced therapies, and we're going to spend a lot of time over the next couple of days talking about that, and a lot of that is how we think about our efforts to modernize healthcare systems, whether they're in the US, in Europe, regulators, payers, health technology assessment bodies, companies themselves, right? We're all kind of thinking about how do we embrace the future of these new and important modalities for patients. Now, I'm going to just step back for a minute and pull back the curtain from a discussion we had with our board of directors on January 31st of this year, right? With the senior team, we brought forward to our board of directors a somewhat new vision and strategy for the next few years and where we wanted to go. And before we really got into that, we stepped back and kind of popped up and asked a different question, which is, why do we exist, right, as a community? Why does ARM really exist? And we spent some time reflecting on that. And I showed a slide that I'm not going to pop up today But it really, the first bullet on the slide, we wrote, patients are our true north, right? Patients are our true north. And we had a great discussion as a board, with the board around, are we all just aligned on that? It's one of those things, you just assume that everybody's aligned on that, but it's worth stepping back every now and then and just pressure testing that. Are we aligned that patients are our true north? And thankfully, everybody said yes, emphatically, right? But we had a really good discussion about the criticality of that. And as I like to say to people, why do I think that's true? Because for our patients, for too many people around the world, millions of people around the world, the status quo too often represents death or serious disability. And we're in the business of transforming that status quo, disrupting that status quo. And that's how we think about modernizing healthcare systems. It's not to do it for its own sake. It's to do it because at the end of the day, there's a patient out there for whom the status quo too often represents death or serious disability. And that's our mission. I know that's why we all come together. And I won't go through everything in the revised mission statement. It's up here, and it encapsulates many of the things that you saw on the previous slide as well. But I think it's good sometimes to yank back the curtain and share those things. And then we thought about a number of things when we were looking at our strategy and where we were going in the future. And one of the things we worked on with Laura and her team and with input from the board was thinking about these events, right? Like, how do we think about these events and what makes them special? And I sort of said, we should think about it as what's part of our secret sauce here at the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine. And when we think about our meetings and our ability to convene, right, it's a few things. We get a lot of feedback and positive inputs on, look, we do a good job of bringing senior executives together when we convene, right? People really like the networking opportunities that we provide, right? The informal time that we have together. Whenever possible, and we've seen this at our meeting on the Mesa, we like to take over, we're selfish, we like to take over the whole joint, the whole hotel if we can, right? And we get good feedback on that too. We think that creates both exclusivity and important serendipitous opportunities to network and bump into colleagues. We get really good feedback on the one-on-one partnering system that's been put in place that Laura and her team have worked on for years and honed over time. And then a lot of the other nice things we kind of take for granted but are important to recognize, right? A balance of indoor and outdoor space, desirable location with, thankfully, good weather, other great amenities that are important to making a nice conference, right? And with that, a little bit of news. So this will be the last year we will gather here in Barcelona. And in 2024, we're going to move the meeting on the Mediterranean to Rome, to the Rome Cavalieri Waldorf Astoria. I'll get into why in a moment. It's a beautiful property. It's much bigger, and that's the primary driver of all this. We will also be able to take over 100% of the event space and over 80% of the rooms, which we think will be very desirable for people. And it's a great property, as I mentioned, right inside Rome. We didn't make this decision lightly, and it didn't just pop up overnight. This was many, many months in thinking and planning. Frankly, the biggest reason is we are outgrowing this facility. We're just getting too big. We're capped at 550 people that we can have here, and we think we'll go probably next year up to 100 more than that at least, maybe 700, and we'll probably continue to grow as the sector, as the field continues to mature and grow, right? But again, the previous slide, two slides before, we want to keep that secret sauce, and so we're growing, but we're trying to be very purposeful and deliberative about how we grow our events, right? Another important thing we got on feedback, this meeting is directly coupled to Easter. We have to do this meeting per the hotel, really abutting Easter, and that's a challenge for some of the United States, but definitely for many of our European colleagues, and we've heard that feedback that it's disruptive because of the Easter break. So we are now able to decouple it. I think Easter falls at the end of March next year, and so we'll have a week in between, which we think will allow for better participation from across many countries. We're going to expand our programming to 2.5 days, mirroring what we do at the meeting on the Mesa, so we'll get another half day in. We'll feel like we actually own the hotel, which I think people will really enjoy. and it's a great setting overall. So you're the first to know. We're going to put out a broader communication to our membership later today. I don't think it's gone out yet. I think it'll go out a little bit later. It has gone out. It has gone out. So you're the first people that I've told personally. Okay, so another little bit of news. We're moving the meeting on the Mesa. I thought it would be good to just get up here and be super transparent about everything we're doing. We're going to return to California this fall in October, but the following year in 2024, we're going to move to the Arizona Biltmore, which is another Waldorf Astoria resort. I don't know if people have ever been there before. I think I went about 20 years ago and have been probably 3 times over the last 20 years to the Biltmore in Arizona. If anybody has been there, I'd encourage you to find people that have been there or come talk to me. It's a spectacular property. It's a Frank Lloyd Wright inspired gem in the desert. It's a really cool, funky property that I think you'll like. It's very iconic. Again, we'll have a lot more space, which is a primary driver, right? We'll be able to take over 100% of the meeting space. The hotel rooms right there on campus will more than double, which is terrific, and it's a special, special place. I will be talking about this when we see people in California, but again, I wanted just to give this group a little heads up. Okay, with those important administrative announcements aside, let's talk about the state of ATMPs in Europe, right? So, with all important stories in our field, let's talk about patients first, right? So this is a woman that I met in Brussels in October. We held a briefing at the European Parliament, and Lucy Elliker was good enough to come and share her story about her son, who's pictured over on the right. Opie was, I believe, 5 months old when he was diagnosed with cancer and went through a pretty grueling regimen of chemotherapy and bone marrow transplant, and it didn't work. And she was heartbroken. And she and her oncology team worked together and decided they were going to try CAR T therapy. I believe he was the 9th child to have a CAR T therapy in Europe, from what I understand. And he responded incredibly well. And she and her doctors, the medical team, are very hopeful he will live a full and healthy, complete, long life, right? So that's the goal, that's the hope, but today he's doing incredibly well. She shared her very passionate story, very emotional story, with this important audience in the European Parliament, and one of her important points was, we think CAR T should be the first line of treatment, not the last line of treatment. That was a pretty amazing story by itself. For me, it struck me because within a 2-month period of time, 3 people said to me the exact same thing. 3 mothers described their journey, their child's journey. Some were teenagers. You know, this boy was the youngest of the bunch at 2 years old by the time he got on CAR T. 3 people said the same thing. It shouldn't be this hard. We ought to be able to get access to these important therapies much earlier. And I think that's an important thing for us all to remember as a community. I showed the slide back at JP Morgan, the investor conference in January. You know, this is a really transformative year. Important therapies are being approved for patients with hemophilia and sickle cell disease, and we're marking really great progress, right? With gene therapies for hemophilia A from BioMarin and hemophilia B from Unicure and CSL Behring, now approved in the EU. We're seeing gene editing technologies from CRISPR and Vertex that are likely to be approved for sickle cell disease this year, and from Bluebird Bio, approved for gene therapy for sickle cell also. And it really begs the question, you know, the era of larger patient populations has arrived, and our healthcare system's really ready for that. And, you know, again, more progress. There are a bunch of notable firsts that we see coming to the European Union between last year and this year, and this is great news, right? The first gene therapy approved for AADC and for hemophilia A, approved ahead of the United States last year. The first CRISPR gene editing medicine approved globally this year, we believe, right? Yescarta became the first CAR T approved in Europe for a second-line treatment. The first allogeneic T-cell therapy was approved in Europe ahead of the United States. And then we think we're going to see the second CAR T approved as a second-line treatment perhaps this year. So a lot of notable firsts in Europe on the one hand. On the other hand, we're seeing a slowing of some of the approvals that are out there. The orange bucket represents European approvals, and the kind of purple bucket represents anticipated US approvals. So, you know, still good to see drugs being approved, great to see Unicure and CSL Behring's hemophilia B approved in February, but the pipeline appears to be thinning a bit. And so, you know, in our world, we think it's time to take action to ensure patient access. You know, the European Union has always been, you know, Europe has always been one of the great medical centers, a great innovative center with a top flight workforce, right? But we see a flashing yellow light of caution for patient access. And I shared this slide with our European colleagues in Brussels back in our European Parliament briefing. 7 out of 25 approved ATMPs have been pulled off of the market, largely because of commercial concerns. As I mentioned, clinical trials and investments are stagnating a bit with only 3 new phase 1 trials in 2022. You know, but at the Alliance for Regenerative Medicine, hope springs eternal. We're in the optimism business. And so we think, look, there's a better path that can perhaps be taken. There's a once-in-a-generation chance to reverse this trend. And in Brussels, they are actively working on revising the European pharmaceuticals legislation. Hopefully that draft will be out soon. That will kick off a long process that we'll be involved in. And really it's a chance to kind of modernize this healthcare system, to move from thinking about medicine as only the pills of the past, right? The pharmaceuticals of the 1960s and 70s, and to embrace them as a really the future of medicine, to exempt ATMPs from GMO legislation, and to really try to get the balance right with the hospital exemption. And we've got a panel that's coming up later today on that important topic. There's also great work that needs to be done on health technology assessments. We're going to have a panel on that later, to both embrace real-world evidence, to leverage the health data space to collect real-world evidence, and to continue to collaborate with developers through the joint clinical assessment process. So there is hope. And you know, we've tried to align these important issues with our panels while we're here, right? One that's coming up, I'm about to turn it over to my friend Matthew Dirty, the CEO and of Cell and Gene Therapy Catapult, a really important UK institution. He'll introduce the panel, but it's a session on a new era for ATMPs, commercializing in the European Union, which is a super important topic. Later today at 1:45, I'll turn it over to Miguel Fort, one of our board members, CEO and co-founder of KeyG Therapeutics, and he's going to lead a really great panel on the hospital exemption. Is it a necessary shortcut or the end of high regulatory standards? A very important topic for us, right? So I encourage you all to catch both of those panels. And in closing, before I turn it over to Matthew, you know, my kind of final thoughts to kick off the conference. Celebrate, right? This is a great, these events are a great chance to have important discussions on the future of engineered cell therapy and genetic medicine. I'd encourage everybody, be curious, right, to the hopes and legitimate concerns of our stakeholders. Really focus on patients and caregivers. We've got a panel that I think people really enjoy on the patient perspective. Listen and learn from what, you know, again, what I call our true north. Network. We've got 550 leaders from the sector here. It's a great chance to do more networking, and as a community, learn from each other and help each other. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matthew. We can learn from Matthew and this panel, and I think it will help all of us, this panel. So with that, Matthew, I'll turn it over to you.